this is why Jesus died. To create for God a multi-ethnic church. His blood was shed. His body was broken. Thorns were pressed into his face. His hands were pierced. His feet were spiked. His back was beaten. To find every place of hostility between Jews and Gentiles, Chinese and Uyghurs, blacks and whites, and heal it. That's what the gospel is for. Now, somebody may be thinking, why has a preacher got to go and get all political this Sunday? Don't you know you're supposed to keep politics out of the sermon? And here's my response to that. We have been conditioned to think about questions of ethnic conflict and racism in terms of politics. Paul would like us to realize that it's not really a political issue, it's a theological issue. And God has not given any government in this country or any other country, in this century or any other century, the one thing that can heal racism, ethnocentrism, or any other ism for that matter. And that one thing, brothers and sisters, is the gospel. This is how Jesus heals racism. He dies to reconcile everyone in the world to God. And it turns out that if I've been reconciled to God and you've been reconciled to God, then we have been reconciled to one another. And that's true across every division, whether it's socioeconomic or ethnic or geographical or any other. His goal, Paul says, is to create in himself, right? In Jesus, in his body, on the cross, breaking down the wall of hostility. And we said we've all seen that wall of hostility. We've seen it on the news. We've seen it in the papers. We may have seen it firsthand. We've seen that wall of hostility. We may, because remember, he's talking to Christians here. And the people, and we are to be reminded the people of God are not immune to these problems. We need to be willing to identify and confess them and receive God's healing for them. But he wants them to know that Jesus died to create peace, not just between us and God, but among us. And among us and the people who live across town. And among us and the people who live on the other side of the tracks. And all of the cliches for people we'd rather not have around. Like Jesus died to find the hostility and take a sledgehammer to that wall. Something more powerful, he died to take his cross to that wall. And in his body, he makes peace. And this is the church's vocation. And that, friends, is the gospel brought to bear on one of the biggest problems in the history of the world. And there is no temporal institution or authority who has what it takes to heal it. God has given the church the one thing that can heal the hostility and the division that we lament. God has given us the one thing that can actually transform self-centered ethnocentrists. Like Jesus came to heal that, and he does it with the gospel. He does it with his cross. And when we take the gospel in our hands and declare it to our neighbors and the nations, guess what Jesus does? He heals relationships. He reconciles a people to God of varying ethnicities. And he makes for himself a people through which he is glorified. Now, when Paul says this one new humanity, sometimes that has been misused to mute or squish ethnic distinctives. And I think that's a big problem because God is not interested in sort of taking people of different ethnicities and pretend they're all the same. If he did, why would he make people of different ethnicities in the first place? What God has done is he has given particular glories to every ethnicity. And when we come together in peace, those glories glorify God in all of His beauty and His magnificence. So several years ago, some of us went to Guatemala together. And Flip, I was thinking about a conversation that we had. Thomas, I think you may have been standing there. We were walking around Casa Bernabe, just looking at the architecture and the structures. You remember what you said to me? You said, every time I come to Central America, I hope I get this right, I'm struck by the mason work. Like there's something about Central Americans where they're just crazy good at this, better than everybody else. I think I'm paraphrasing you now, but that's the idea. I hope it's fair. And we were just sort of standing there reflecting on how God gives different people certain gifts. And if I don't ever go down there and see it, if I don't ever, or at least have somebody come back and tell me about it, and if I'm not exposed to different ethnicities and the glories that Jesus, in His kindness, has given to them, then my experience of Jesus and His body is impoverished. Let me put that differently. If my experience of Jesus is limited to experiencing Him amongst people who are just like me, I have not even begun to experience the vast glories of the Lord Jesus Christ.